the polls that we just talked about, and Peter Baker wrote such a smart analysis about. I mean, these are historically bad. But it's not just that they're bad. It's that the administration is showing no signs of trying to improve them, right? All he's doing so far is doubling down on things that earned him those poor poll numbers. Obviously, the war in Iran has no end in sight, but they're still pushing on the deportations, which have become extremely unpopular. He's done very little to roll out any sort of economic policy that could help with inflation. Everything he's doing, making it worse for himself and Republicans this November.
Well, and that's why, people have always been concerned that he would run again in 2028, right? Or at least attempt it. And now he keeps every weekend there's some new sign of that. That's not helpful Republicans in 2026 either, right? It's like that he's just so focused on his legacy, the war in Iran, nothing's getting better, worrying about stupid things like the reflecting pool. And but we have to remind ourselves, even with these historically low poll numbers for himself, Republicans, his standing within the Republican Party, this was not true of President Nixon at this point in his presidency.
In fact, it was Republicans who forced Nixon out.
Yeah. Right. It is merely the entire history of polling, Jen.
That's all.
It can't be that long. That's all. Anthony, I want to put a question to the mooch here, because one of the things that I am thinking about as we look at the AI slop posts that are being made, while the history of polling reflects that this is the second most unpopular person, shy of Richard Nixon, ever, is there are some people who are perhaps already paying a premium to get those posts before everybody else. There is a subscription aspect, a Bloomberg terminal aspect to access to that photo of the president, your former boss, walking that alien through a hypothetical government site, I guess. Could you just put that into context as well? Just like the idea that, oh, by the way, there is this get the news first for a specific reason dynamic there.
Well, listen, it's terrible. I mean, it's got to be a lot of different ethics violations to do that. And I think this is the problem that a lot of people on Wall Street don't understand. When he does things like that, then the Clarity Act stalls because his opposition doesn't want to give him a win on something like that, which is, of course, the cryptocurrency regulation. And so he has broken every norm. He's taken things right up to the line. And in many cases, and I think this is one of those cases where he's over the line, but he doesn't care. And his poll numbers reflect that because his attitude, and I've said this on our podcast, and Caddy's probably tired of me saying it, he wants to make money and he wants our attention. So the AI stuff is attention related. The express tweeting stuff is to make him and his friends money. And that's what he's going to do over the next 2 years. He's not concerned about the American people or whether gas goes to $7 by election day. So that's the trouble here.
I mean, that picture of Elvis, I'd pay early. I'd pay early.
Trade on that, John. Trade on that.
That's one.
Oh, this is not giving out sports scores, guys. I mean, come on. Can you imagine? I mean, that would be another nightmare for everybody.
Yeah. Wait, it's an untapped market. He'll get there eventually.
Really
so Rich Lowry has a new piece in the National Review titled, "The Iran War is Eating Trump's Presidency." He writes in part this: "An Iran war that was supposed to be brief and then was supposed to be over is imposing an increasing price on Donald Trump's presidency. The Iran war is different than Iraq, yet the political trajectory looks similar. Then, as now, an unpopular conflict is putting downward pressure on a Republican president's approval rating. The same way that Bush's success toppling the Taliban created the predicate for the Iraq war, Trump's stunning capture of Nicolas Maduro made it easier to believe that the Iran war would be a cakewalk. Perhaps Trump will manage a satisfactory conclusion, and he has more room to bounce back up again politically than Bush did after years of the Iraq war. Still, the next Republican president to launch major military operations would be well served to be more prudent and mindful of worst-case scenarios than were either of his two otherwise very different GOP predecessors. And Caddy, I think the comparison's pretty spot on. But more than that is, as we spent a lot of time in the first hour today talking about how Trump he's in this bind of his own making. And there's no good way out of this. There's going to be either political or geostrategic or both consequences no matter what he ends up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, behind all of this is a competency question. Why did the Trump team this time around not surround themselves with real experts who understood Iran, who understood what Iran's motives might be, who understood the likelihood of Iran shutting the Straits of Hormuz, and what kind of action America would have to take to prevent that? And if he had surrounded himself with experts who really understood this and then gone out and made the case to the American public, I think we could have had possibly a different outcome. I mean, there's a reason you go to Congress. It's not just for the legal reason to get Congress's backing and the financial backing for a war, which clearly the president didn't do but should have done. It forces a president to make a case to the American public. And that's useful when things start to go wrong or when the war drags on, not the 4 to 6 weeks he promised, but now more than 6 months. I think that would have been very useful to him. I mean, Anthony, when you look at this war, and I think the comparison with Iraq goes so far, but Iraq, we were coming out of 9/11. It was a different mood in the country. Yeah, they made an erroneous case for going into Iraq over Afghanistan, but there at least was some public support for it. I don't think there was the public in America in going in February into this war. They had no reason to think that Iran was a greater threat to them in February of 2026 than it had been 6 months before, or 1 year before, or 2 years before, right?
Kathy, I thought we won the war. I mean, he tweeted over the
Many
weekend that this is the 107th time that we've won the war, and they're totally decimated, yet the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and our strategic petroleum reserve is at the lowest level that it's been since 1983. So, the president doesn't care. I think someday an historian will figure out what the real motivation was for that war. But it's not what he's saying it was, because, again, he dropped those bunker buster bombs in June of 2025 and said that he eliminated the nuclear threat. So ultimately, we really don't know what he's doing. There's no push inside the Congress to help us figure out what he's doing or what the motivation is. But by next Sunday, you guys will be on Morning Joe Monday morning saying, we won the war again, because he'll be tweeting about how successful he was with these non-negotiations.
Okay, Anthony, you and I both had the same job. You for President Trump, me for President Obama as White House Communications Director. We're sitting there in the tiny upper press offices in the West Wing. We have the insane AI slop tweets over the weekend. We have him pulling back from attacks on Iran again after saying there are, I think Jonathan said 11 now rounds of supposed talks with Iran or near deals. What do we suggest that the president actually do at this point, knowing who we're dealing with?
So I tell you, listen, stay away. Try to go into the old executive office building. There's a bowling alley that Richard Nixon put there. You and I are going to bowl, at least 3 or 4 games to stay away from him. And that's actually what's going on. And so there's 1 or 2 people that are helping him generate those AI tweets. There's nobody in that White House is saying, hey, it doesn't make sense to be kissing a crucifix after you posted yourself as Dr. Jesus on Orthodox Easter. And so I would tell you, listen, if you want to keep your job, I didn't. I got ejected like a James Bond villain after 11 days, like blown out of the Aston Martin. But if you want to keep your job, let's go bowling, because if you say anything to him that he doesn't like, he's going to hit you with a ray gun.
There's the answer. Go bowling. Co-host of the Rest is Politics podcast, former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci. Thank you so much. The Harry Styles-esque tour of the Rest is Politics podcast will kick off this October.